Welcome to On the Middle East, the podcast of the award-winning media service El Monitor, where each week we talk with the decision makers and thought leaders who are making the news and shaping the trends in the Middle East. I'm Andrew Parasolidi, president of El Monitor, and our guest today is Fyodor Lukyanov, chairman of the Council on Foreign and Defense Policy, the oldest Russian foreign policy think tank. Lukyanov is also editor-in-chief of the Russia and Global Affairs Journal, which is published in Russian and English, and with the participation of the U.S. journal Foreign Affairs. Fyodor is also research director at the International Valdai Discussion Club, a member of the Presidium of the Russian International Affairs Council. He is a research professor at the Higher School of Economics in Moscow, and he has worked as a correspondent, commentator, and editor for numerous Russian printed and electronic media, and is a former columnist with El Monitor. Fyodor Lukyanov is one of the most sought-after analysts and thought leaders about Russian national security policy, and he's with us today. My conversation with Fyodor Lukyanov about the summit meeting this week between U.S. President Joe Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin, and Russian policy in the Middle East more generally, begins now. Fyodor, welcome back to El Monitor and to our podcast on the Middle East.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Hi.
Let's get right into it. What is Russian President Vladimir Putin's assessment of his first meeting with Joe Biden, with Biden as the U.S. president? What did President Putin want going into the summit? What did he get coming out? And where do you see U.S.-Russian relations standing at this point post-summit?
Yeah, first of all, we don't know the real mood of politicians because they are professionals in hiding it. But if we would judge on what Putin said publicly after this meeting, both in Geneva immediately after negotiations and then in Moscow 2 days after, he sounded extremely positive. I would say more positive than he ever expressed himself about any talks with American leaders. He praised Biden for being a highly serious, very competent person. He basically rejected some claims which some of counterparts did, that Biden was unfit, and so did this stuff which is popular among Republicans in the United States. He said that, according to him, Biden is extremely sharp and very well prepared for any substantial talks. Again, I did not hear such a high estimation from Putin about actually any of Biden's predecessors. And it seems that this meeting and the atmosphere was really much, much better than anybody could expect. As for substance, it might sound a bit murky, but we need to be realistic. Antagonistic, very problematic relationship between Russia and the United States will remain. No one spoke about to end rivalry and competition. It was not anybody's goal before this summit. It is not on the agenda after this summit. But what happened is, in a way, extremely important and needed, because a relationship between Moscow and Washington in recent years went not just bad, they went totally absurd and irrational. Any agenda disappeared, actually. American question, American issue has been part of Russian domestic discussion since quite a long time. It is no surprise. But what happened in the United States was a big surprise to all of us because Russia, after 2016, became a hot, if not the most important domestic issue in the United States, which destroyed everything in international relations between Russia and the United States. And it doesn't matter what were reasons for that. So we can discuss it, but I think it's another issue. But what we have now, I think leaders agreed to basically come back to well-balanced, structured, and properly established confrontation of the Cold War time, which was based on particular rules and based on understanding of mutual responsibility. And compared to what we had, say, 2-3 years ago, it's a big achievement.
One of the outcomes of the summit was an agreement for working groups, follow-up conversations to discuss rules of the road on cyber, as well as strategic weapons and regional issues. Now, with regard to cyber, we'll get into the Middle East, of course, but let's talk about cyber for a minute. If my memory serves, when you and I last met in person in Moscow in 2017, this was soon after U.S. President Donald Trump had just taken office. And the group I was with in our meeting with Russian leaders was that Moscow wanted to talk with the U.S. about cyber. It was an issue in the first Putin-Trump summit at the G20 in Hamburg in 2017, that same year. Nothing came of that. And many American politicians continued to be wary that Putin could be trusted in dealing on cyber. So tell us a little about the Russian president's interests in dealing on cyber. Am I correct that it has been on the Russian agenda for a while? And what are the expectations and how to overcome this level of distrust?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Cyber has been among top priorities of Russian leadership since a pretty long period. And Russia was, I think, the first country which started to raise this issue in the United Nations maybe 15 years ago or something like that. So in our political vocabulary, it was called at that time information security. And that was really one of biggest concerns for Russian Security Council, for example, and President Putin. Recently, yes, you're right. Russia offered several times to US administrations, starting from Obama administration, then Trump administration, to engage in discussions about this. It never happened because American position until recently, until Biden, has always been, come on, first acknowledge meddling in 2016 election, and then we will see whether we can discuss something. Of course, it was a non-starter and no progress has been made at all. A last big proposal came, I think it was October 2020, when Putin made a statement about necessity to launch a broad discussion about cyber. That was short before US elections, and so he basically did mention Trump. He said that any US administration would be welcome to start. And we see that Biden changed position. So Biden is actually the first American leader who agreed to talk about this. I think he made a very right thing, because even if we assume, as most of US politicians and security people believe, that Russia was and remains to be very active in this field, that's exactly the reason why conversations should start. I'm absolutely sure that cyber activities against each other are bilateral. The question which I always did pose to myself was why Americans, so to say, speak so much about how vulnerable they are. Because judging from public debate, US is totally unprepared, unprotected, and so on. Each day something happens, which I think maybe it's because of very high level of US democracy. In Russian case, I'm absolutely sure that Russia is experiencing a lot of attacks as well. But Russian political culture is that if you don't speak about this, you make you stronger. You don't give your opponent, so to say, additional leverage. Anyway, this area is highly important. In particular, it's important because nowadays, cybersecurity field is empty, so to say. I mean, we don't have any rules, any norms, any agreed or even invented approaches how to address it between Russia and the United States, how to address it globally. It's absolutely new frontier. And to a certain extent, if those conversations might be successful and might lead to in-depth discussion about this, how to create a model, a scheme to address it, that might play same role as arms control talks played after Cuban Missile Crisis, because at that time we also needed a model how to minimize risks in that area. And that worked for 50 years after that, or maybe even 60. Here we need to start, and in case of success, we might have a framework which will be very important boost to restore trust between Russia and the United States at all.
Fyodor, let me ask just two more non-Middle East questions. First, how important was it for President Putin to have the Nord Stream gas pipeline off the agenda at his summit with President Biden? And secondly, how much of a priority is it for Russia to get U.S. sanctions lifted?
As for sanctions, the answer is very easy. No one expects here that any American sanctions can be lifted anytime soon. I think this knowledge came when Russian specialists started to carefully and with big interest study the mechanisms of US politics, how sanctions are being created, how sanctions work, what might be behind particular types of sanctions. It was not the case until relatively recently. It was not an area for expertise and research in Russia. Now it is. And since this investigation started, we understood that most of sanctions are basically forever. It's impossible to expect them to be lifted because most of them are connected to political solutions inside the United States, not on the international level, but mostly inside the United States. And I don't believe that anybody here expects sanction situation to be eased. What can be discussed, not with Americans maybe, but in general, whether much harsher forms of sanctions, and the United States indeed has enormous leverage in this field, being de facto monopoly in the international finance system. US capacity is almost unlimited in case of wish and political will. So how to avoid sanctions which can deeply disrupt everything here? can say Iranian type sanctions. That is an issue, but all the rest is not an issue. And again, I believe that no one expects something to happen. As for your first question was about, sorry.
The Nord Stream gas pipeline.
Nord Stream gas pipeline was important, is important, but of course, its symbolic significance is bigger than the practical one. Yes, indeed, Russia is interested in new pipelines to European Union. I would say now much more for commercial reasons than political reasons, because sometimes it's highly overestimated in Europe and in the United States, the role of pipelines in Russian geopolitical strategy. It used to be in the Soviet time, in a way that Soviet Union wanted to build this network to maintain and to increase geopolitical stability, to increase interdependence. But it's not the case anymore due to many transit states which can basically derail everything if they want. So I think commercial stuff is more important than geopolitical. But a particular case of Nord Stream 2 was not so much about Russia-US, it was about US-Germany. On the Russian side, the question was very simple. If Germany would give up and say, okay, we rank with our US allies, sorry, we cannot do anything, that would pose a huge question to Russian side. Is it worth at all to deal with Europeans in any issues if they don't have any sovereignty to take decisions which they want to take? And that would be a very significant signal in case Germany would agree that the US would kill Nord Stream 2. It didn't happen, so now we are back to more or less normal business. I'm sure that the whole story of Nord Stream 2 is not over, and European Union, with the American support, will do everything to deprive Russia from as many special privileges on this pipeline as possible. But still, of course, it strengthened the traditional model of relationship. As for United States, I think Biden made a very rational decision. He decided that in the middle term and long term perspective, constructive relationship with Germany is more important and more beneficial for the United States than this particular project.
Putin and Biden reportedly discussed Syria, and there will be a vote at the UN Security Council next month to reauthorize the only remaining humanitarian passage into Syria. Does Russia consider Syria a win in terms of its foreign policy or a quagmire? And what would Putin like to achieve with regard to Syria and in terms of how Syria plays in U.S.-Russia relations? And what do you expect at the Security Council next month with regard to the humanitarian passage? Will Russia abstain as it did last time? Will it agree, or do you think it'll veto?
As for Syrian role in U.S.-Russian relations, I don't believe that this role is too big. For one simple reason. Putting aside all of statements, discussions, and rhetoric, if we look at the dynamic, the trend of US policy in Syria, in the Middle East, starting from Barack Obama presidency, that's basically step-by-step withdrawal of the United States from the region, because US political establishment, in broader terms, decided that this region is not that vitally important for the US interest as it was considered before. At least it is not that important to place there many of capacities, be it military or others. So that means that Russian activities in the Middle East since quite a long time are much more depending on positions of regional players like Turkey, like Saudi Arabia, like maybe to a lesser extent Qatar, who else? Much more Russia has to do with those countries to understand what kind of dynamic is to expect, rather than with the United States. And again, not because Russia disregards the role of the United States, but because the United States' role is becoming less passionate, so to say, for American leadership. Whether Russia sees Syria a win or a quagmire, I think neither nor. Of course, okay, it is a win because Russian presence in Syria increased Russian geopolitical weight, and that had very practical consequences, positive consequences. It's not just about prestige. It's about Russian economy. If Russia would not demonstrate that level of engagement and efficiency in Syria, with military force, with diplomacy, and so on, I'm absolutely sure that Saudi Arabia, for example, would never engage in any substantial discussions with Russia about oil prices, about oil production, and so on. Before that, Saudi Arabia was basically disinterested to discuss this stuff with Moscow. Now we see that Russian-Saudi agreements are a key element of the whole market, international market, which is vitally and highly important for Russian economy, as we understand. It's not good that we are so much dependent on oil, but it's fact of life, unfortunately. And in this regard, Syrian intervention was practically very useful for Russia. And that's what I explain to ordinary people when I'm being asked here in Moscow. Some people ask me at lectures, public lectures, okay, abstract greatness is good, is fine, is brilliant, but why should we do all this? What is my personal interest in Syria, for example? And then I can explain exactly this. There are some other activities of Russia which I cannot explain in this way, unfortunately, but Syria is a good example. In the future, I think that Russia has no ambition to become an arbiter in the Middle East, or even less to try to replace United States there, or to restore same role as Soviet Union did play in the region. So Russian interest is much more practical. Of course, presence in Syria will be kept as it is, or maybe even increased for understandable reasons. Situation in situation in the maritime, in the space of oceans, is now element of new wave of global strategic competition. And Russian, in this regard, if we look at Russian actions in last decade, first Crimea and then Syria, that increased significantly Russian capacity to participate in this competition. As for other conflicts there, I would dare to say that those are, so to say, additional bonuses sometimes, but in general, be it Yemen, be it Libya, be it, if we go downstairs, so to say, to Central African Republic, it's much more about trying to take some chances, but it's not about long-term strategy.
And what about at the Security Council? Because the United States is given priority to the renewal of this passage that allows humanitarian aid into Syria. Russia so far has stated its concerns about reauthorizing that passage, preferring instead that assistance should go through the Syrian government, not into territory held by opposition forces.
That's a complicated question. I'm afraid I'm not that deep in this problem. I can say a couple of general things. First of all, it's quite obvious that one of key priorities for Russia in Syria is to step by step strengthen and re-legitimize Bashar al-Assad's rule. And from this point of view, of course, the more international obligations are connected to Damascus, the higher chances that this regime will be, so to say, accepted internationally. Having said that, I think that Russia, of course, is interested to keep stability in Syria, and also political process which should engage opposition, different groups of opposition, is in Russian interest. So I think that work with those foreign forces who can represent some groups of opposition, be it Turkey or Qatar, or to some extent United States, if we talk about Kurds, that is seen as a way to maybe ease the whole situation, not humanitarian situation. To be cynical, I don't think this is the main priority for many political actors, but the general situation of political stability in the area. Your direct question, how Russia will vote, I abstain. I don't know. Sorry.
It's all right. Look, Iran is holding elections today. This was also mentioned in the summit. Both the United States and Russia are committed to preventing an Iranian nuclear weapon. Russia is a member of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action and involved in the negotiations. But Russia also has its own relationship with Iran and is looking to deepen its defense, economic, and even civil nuclear cooperation. How does Russia view its ties to Iran, including in the context of its relationship with the United States?
You know, I don't believe that the Russian relationship with Iran should be seen through the prism of Russian relationship with the United States. Not anymore. It doesn't mean that the United States is insignificant. It rather means that Iran is changing, and Iranian interests are not necessarily the same as Russian interests, not against each other, but they are simply different. Iranian deal, of course, the official position of Russia is very well known. Russia is supporting Iranian deal. Russia was very instrumental 2015 in facilitating this deal. When President Trump decided to withdraw, Russia was among those who criticized. But to be honest, is it a big issue for Russia to restore deal or to create a new deal? I don't think so. That's very important for the United States. It looks like Biden administration is really interested to do it. It's extremely important for Iran because of economic situation. For Russia, it's fine, and Russia, of course, will welcome if this deal will be reinstated or reviewed, or at least it will happen again. If not, yeah, too bad, but it's not a high priority for Russia to try to do something with this. Russian-Iranian relationship is not easy. Russian-Iranian interests of Russia and Iran are not coinciding in many places, including Syria. At the same time, I think Iran is viewed as a country which is not necessarily always very loyal to Russia, but as a very important state in this area. And whatever happens with the Iranian deal, Iran will not disappear as an actor which has its role to play. As for Russia, for Iran, I think Iranians have a lot of grievances about Russia. At the same time, they, of course, they hope to get benefits from a relationship with Russia, including the regional aspect, Southern Caucasus and the Caspian Basin. At the end of the day, it's a tricky, not linear relationship, a rather positive, but with many additional circumstances, and it has much less to do with the United States and the position of the United States than it used to be, say, 10 years ago, when Iranian sanctions and negotiations around nuclear program was actually an important part of the so-called Recep between Russia and the United States, launched by President Obama. At that time, Iran was really a very important element of this relationship. It's not the case anymore.
How serious do you see the divergence between Russian and Iranian interests in Syria? Are these significant enough? Russia continues to coordinate its activities in Syria with Iran through the Astana Group. They both support the Syrian government. What are the differences, and how deep are those differences?
I think those differences are there. We should not exaggerate them. What are differences? Differences are that Iranian interests, for right reasons in many cases, is to increase Iranian influence in Syria and to make Syria a zone, a country which can serve Iranian interests in the region better than it would be without Syria. Fair enough, it might be a legitimate goal to a certain extent. A Russian interest is actually to stabilize Syria as it is, of course, under Bashar al-Assad rule, but to stabilize it, to possibly decrease level of internal contradictions there. And here we can confront the phenomenon that this goal is not necessarily coinciding with the goal of Iran, because Iranian wish to increase its influence in Syria, not necessarily increase the level of internal stability as Russia would like to see it, just inside Syria, because all of us know that it's not an easy country. Secondly, Russia is interested to be an honest broker in the Middle East, to have a very workable and rational and constructive relationship with all involved, Saudi Arabia, Israel, all those who are in charge of something. Iran is not happy at all about Russian ties with Israel. Until now, Israel is, of course, very unhappy about Russian ties with Iran. Until now, Russian diplomacy, and particularly President Putin, managed skillfully to avoid, so to say, to make a choice between rivaling partners. But it's difficult. And in this regard, Russia is, of course, much more eager to take into account Israeli security interests in Syria than Iran would love Russia to do it. So, you are a great specialist on the Middle East. You know that in this area, you cannot expect on simple schemes. And Russia under Putin, and especially since intervention 2015, is about to make schemes more and more sophisticated and complicated.
President Putin had a good relationship with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Is the Russian-Israel relationship affected at all by Netanyahu's loss of the prime ministership? And you mentioned that Russia looks to be an honest broker, but not necessarily an arbiter, or to assume the role that the Soviet Union had or that the United States has. Do you see a reduced role with the new Israeli government, a reduced role because of what's happened recently between Israel and Hamas, or does Russia see an opportunity for a larger role?
Yes, that's a well-known fact that President Putin has a very warm relationship with ex-Prime Minister Netanyahu. This relationship was very helpful in addressing multiple problems and conflicts Russia and Israel had with regard to Syria and Iran. First of all, you can correct me, but I'm not sure that we said goodbye to Mr. Netanyahu forever. So the political life in Israel is very dynamic, so I will not be totally surprised if this government will not serve too long and Netanyahu will be back. But anyway, even if his time is really over and the new setup of politicians will rule Israel, I think Israelis are in this regard in the security field very pragmatic people. They understand arguments connected to security and force. Russia does the same. And most likely, Russian military, Russian diplomats, and President Putin will find ways how to communicate with any Israeli government. Only in case it will be total reshuffle of political establishment in Israel, but I don't believe it will happen soon. As for Palestine, Hamas, and the Middle East peace process, I'm not an official, so Russian diplomats will say something else, but I'm pretty sure that it's not a real issue on the Russian agenda. Russia has good relationship with all, including Hamas, but it's not. It looks like a total deadlock. What is happening in this field, and I don't see any appetite on the Russian side to try to take a mission which is bound to fail. So I think that Russia will, in case a Russian service as an honest broker might be demanded, as it happened recently, Russia offered the opportunity to host talks between different factions in Palestine, or Palestine and Israel, Hamas and Israel, but it was not demanded at that time. Fair enough, so no problem. So I don't believe that this issue will be high on the Russian agenda.
What about Russia's relationship with Turkey? The sale of the S-400 missile defense system to Turkey has been the key sticking point in U.S.-Turkish relations. President Putin has a good relationship with President Erdogan. They continue to engage and coordinate in Syria, for example, even when the interests seem to diverge, especially around Russian support for the Syrian government and Turkey's continued hostility toward Assad until now. Where do you see Russian-Turkish relations going at this point?
Russian relationship with Turkey and Putin's relationship with Erdogan is an extremely interesting phenomenon, because this is the case when parts have diametrically opposite interests. They don't trust each other, and they basically have a tradition of enormously tense relationship in the past, mostly wars. So not a good precondition for constructive work. But at the same time, what we see since 2015, when Russia started Syrian intervention, Russia and Turkey managed to overcome all bilateral crisis situations, including extremely dramatic episode with the Russian plane, which was a military fighter, which was shut down by Turks. So this relationship is based on a mutual understanding that interest might be diverging or opposite, but neither side can achieve its goals in Syria, for example, now even in Southern Caucasus, without at least neutral position from the other side. To put it differently, both sides have almost unlimited potential to undermine any efforts of the vis-a-vis to act. And it's better to communicate, to agree that neither side will use those instruments and those capacities to destroy the counterpart. It's a tricky relationship, but we see that it's pretty stable. And of course, another thing which is important, and that to a certain extent this is also it relates to your previous question about Israel, why Putin's relationship with Netanyahu or Erdogan are so productive. Not because they like each other very much. In case of Putin, Netanyahu, maybe. In case of Putin, Erdogan, I don't think they literally like each other. But they speak same language of very clearly articulated interests and force which can be applied to defend and to promote those interests. And it works, because when all involved speak in those terms, it's better than to be in the atmosphere of traditional diplomacy with omissions and diplomatic talks. It's not what Putin loves. It's not what Erdogan wants to hear. It's not what Netanyahu enjoys. And in this regard, it works pretty well. The power-based, force-based relationship in the world, when norms and rules are going to disappear, most likely, that's the more reliable foundation for relationship than many other things.
Fyodor, we've run out of time. Really enjoyed this conversation today. Thank you for being with us and sharing your analysis on the Middle East.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And I hope it's not our last conversation, because situation will be more and more interesting in months and years to come.
I look forward to the next time as well. We will return after this short break.
I'm Ben Caspit, Al Monitor veteran columnist reporting from Israel, one of the world's major news and action suppliers of all times, comparing to its tiny size. I've been covering and analyzing the political, diplomatic, and military arenas in Israel for over 34 years. My best-selling biography, The Netanyahu Years, was out 2 years ago. I covered 7 prime ministers, 1 major war, 2 intifadas, 1 prime minister's assassination, 2.5 peace treaties, 4 military operations in Gaza, and it's not letting up anytime soon. I'm glad to invite you to On Israel, our brand new podcast, where we will discuss major events in Israel and its surroundings, talk to decision makers, leaders, and analysts, and try to understand the chaos that comes with the territory of Israel and the Middle East. You will never have a dull moment with us. See you soon here on Israel Al Monitor.
Thanks again to our guest today, Fyodor Lukyanov, and to our production team of Phil Calabro of Al Monitor and Beowulf Roshland of Two Square Media Productions. And of course, thanks to all of you for listening. We will return next week, and in the meantime, please sign up for this and our other Al Monitor podcast on Israel at your favorite podcast platform.